finish.
Good day, good day. I am Red Hawk, and we're hanging at the deep end. And you know, here is where we have tried to explore and journey into the deeper side of those things and processes that life cannot do without. We've tried to look at being, life, and consciousness, self-awareness, from some different perspectives, different ways of talking about this great mystery we're inside of. Now, science has been a leader in showing us these new ways as of the last couple hundred years and helping us learn to talk about this journey from nothing to all this, whatever it is. The Vedantas called it Om Tat Sat, the reality of everything, the sacredness of it. And here's the thing. Consciousness is waking to this wonder and finding new ways of understanding and building on these understandings by learning a new language. And every field that I've engaged in has its own language, its own nomenclature. And that's part of the process. Mathematics, astronomy, microbiology, theology, philosophy, on and on. Each field has its own way of talking about itself. Well, at the same time, it has to somehow relate to all the other fields. And what this does is creates interdisciplinary fields like, can you believe it, archaeology and epidemiology. Unbelievable in terms of understanding the past. If you can just believe all these different ways of coming together in evolution science, oh my gosh, biology, epidemiology, astronomy, astrology, all of these are interconnected, and it's a delight to kind of engage in some of those. Now, all of this, if you think about it, has happened through simple acts of noticing. And I like that word noticing. Think about it. When you're on an airplane, you are literally hanging out at 30,000 feet by way of 1,000,000 years of noticing, of human beings noticing things and putting them together over and over, noticing. And today I want to discuss and delight in a particular noticing that helps us see the interconnectedness of life and talk about the interconnectedness of life on this planet Earth. In 1875, a geologist named Edward Seuss coined a term that gave us a way of seeing life here and a context that has been fleshed out in 1,000 more ways since then. The term biosphere. If you look at what the biosphere is, this layer around us that goes to the depths of the ocean all the way to, I think they've been said, it's 12,500 meters high. And it's part, this biosphere, this way, this concept, this context, it's part of our way of seeing today. But this understanding of the sphere of life, biosphere, it was a gift of noticing that helps us see the intricate and integral nature of nature herself, and to, in a glance, intone the interconnectedness and interdependency of everything with everything in this fabric, this web of life that surrounds the planet and which we're a part of. All the plants, the animals, along with the environment that sustains them, make up this biosphere. And this layer of life, in my mind, is who we are. And it gives us an easy context to hang our understandings on. We humans are products of the biosphere, and we share kinship within this context, within this web, with apples and oranges, mosquitoes and larks and grasses and roses and tulips and broccoli and everything. And as someone who has a bit of a mystical tendency, this way of understanding who we are is very helpful. The biosphere concept allows us to see our lives and experience them within a larger sense of surroundings. And as a contemplative, to see beyond the limits of my own life in a world that is wonder itself, makes me all the more a wondrous being. And that's part of what the deep end's about, to help people see how wondrous they are. And, we walk around the world thinking and thinking everything around us can be explained, and yet, there's a lot of noticing yet to do. So I'm thankful for all the noticing that has given rise to our lives, our world, our civilization. And I'm thankful for this language of the biosphere to help me place myself within a frame of reference that includes the whole planet. Again, all that is, Om Tat Sat, as the Vedantists would say. So today we're just going to kind of celebrate and delight and talk about the biosphere as a concept and how it's helped us in our understandings. So we'll open with you, Marianne. What say you on this biosphere?
Well, I think it's, the whole idea that there is this field or sphere where that sustains our life, right? I mean, it's vast, and yet it is small. When you think about the vastness of the universe, or the vastness of even the interior of the planet, and for me, I think it's all about, and we've talked about this so many times, it's all about our connections within this and the interdependency that we all have for life to be able to survive on this planet. It's a narrow bandwidth. And I think that for me, when I was thinking about this week, what keeps coming back to me is our responsibility in protecting our biosphere, and to learn about the things that are harming it, and working towards creating health within it. So that's kind of where I went with this.
Amen. Bob, what say you on this?
Well, I think Marianne was just alluding to the fact, well, a couple of things, that the fact that we're on a sphere gives us limits. Life wants to propagate itself and wants to spread, but because it exists on a sphere, it can't spread infinitely. And it forces interactions with other forms of life because, again, the shape of the sphere limits how far life can spread. So whether it's a herd of antelope that can only go so far and are then forced to stay in a certain niche, or whether it's plankton in the oceans that can only go through certain currents and ultimately have to loop back upon themselves, or whether it's humans who can start in Africa and spread all the way around the earth, but ultimately run into each other again because we're on a sphere. So we've talked about how important the interaction of all of the different forms of life is to our existence. And we owe that to the fact that we're living on a sphere.
Amen. And, it's interesting because in my study this week, they talked about what are the four spheres that make up the biosphere. And it's the lithosphere, which is the land, the hydrosphere, which is the water, the biosphere, which is all the living things, and the atmosphere, which is the air. And they all feed into it. And, one of the things to me that the themes that we've talked about over and over is the oneness of being. And I think the biosphere gave us a gateway, that understanding into seeing that it's literal evidence that it's one body and that we need all the pieces in order for it to work. And that helps me understand, even in my individual body, the whole concept of homeostasis, of all the different parts of my body tugging against each other but balancing each other out. And when they're out of balance, it's called dis-ease. And right now, we've since 1875 and beyond, we've hung a lot of science on this concept of the biosphere, and seeing today, I mean, we're talking about climate change, we're talking about all kinds of pollution stuff. What we're talking about is one body, and the one body needs some medicine, and it's gotten sick. And the language of the biosphere allows us, in my mind, to see that it is one body, and we can start addressing things as they are interconnected, which,
Yeah. Well, and I think, and we're seeing adaptations happening too, because our environment is changing, and so we have to change with it. And how much do we direct that, and how much are we cleaning up messes, I guess. So I think one of the things that I have been trying to learn more about is how to actively adapt, and how to actively direct what we want our living conditions to look like.
Yeah.
We
go ahead, Bob.
We find that through the study of ecology and other disciplines that we not only interact with each other, but we depend on that interaction. There are certain species that can't live without other species interacting with them. We have thousands of different types of microbes in our intestines that we can't live without. And there are plants that can't live without certain insects and so forth. And it's, again, those interconnections. And we have to be very, very careful, because as we learn more about the biosphere, we learn how fragile it really is, and how we can push those interactions only so far before we end up in a negative feedback loop. So it's the more we study how different organisms interact and adapt to each other, it's a good word that Marianne just used, adaptation, we can apply those same lessons to human interaction to a degree.
Yeah.
Well,
Go ahead, Marianne.
It's interesting that you mentioned like the bacteria that lives within us. There are some who believe that the source of disease originates with this gut bacteria, the source of many diseases. And it's because they're out of balance. And being able to bring that into balance, we're going to be healthier.
Well, and it's interesting because I'm a baseball nut, and we were watching the Mariners, and they won, and their new Dan Wilson's the new guy, the new manager. And after the game, he said something that still rings in my head. He said, "The little things make a big difference." And in baseball, it's very obvious. You know what I mean? It's a bunch of singles will still win the game, if you will. And we need to, with this kind of conceptual understanding of a single context, we can no longer see our actions as autonomous. They're now consequential to the whole, and we're beginning to see how those interactions can compound themselves in ways that can be detrimental or could be healthy, depending on what the actions are. And I think that that's part of where the human family is right now. We're waking up to this oneness of being, this fact that we can no longer see anything, no man is an island kind of thing. We're all interconnected, and there's got to be a way to And Marianne, you called adapt. I think that's a good word. Accommodate. The human family is changing, and we're changing literally the biosphere itself. If you look at the trek of plastic into the life stream, not just fish and not just animals, but human beings, and how it's, we don't know what's going to happen with that. But we now see
8 million.
Go ahead.
Yeah, there's I was going to say there's 8 million pieces of plastic that go into the ocean every day. We're changing that environment. And I kind of got into the plastic revolution a while ago, and it's mind-boggling that by 2050 they anticipate that the plastic in the ocean will outweigh the fish in the ocean. And it's just like, that's a lot of plastic going in, and that's destroying that part of the biosphere.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they're now working on new types of plastic and new types of microbes that can ingest that plastic and convert it into more useful substances. So we can, it's a two-pronged approach, trying to reduce the amount of plastic waste. At the same time, we invest in the technologies that can pull us back from the brink where it comes to that particular aspect of the biosphere. But, it's really interesting. You talked about Red Hawk being a baseball nut, and it just suddenly sent a trail of thought through my brain. It was only in like the latter part of the 19th century that Japan opened up to the West. And that was forced by the United States, Admiral Perry and so forth. And one of the things that was infused into Japanese culture was baseball. And they became huge fans of baseball. And the kids grew up loving baseball. And you trace that line to the present day through all of the ups and downs of the relationship between the U.S. and Japan and so forth. And now suddenly you have a person from Japan playing in the major leagues and may be the greatest baseball player to ever play the game.
That's right.
And
Ohtani, exactly.
And if Admiral Perry hadn't forced Japan to open up its doors to Western ideas, including baseball, we would have never seen that happen.
And
baseball is useful.
Yeah. Well, and we're getting back
to... It shows that there can be very positive interactions as well as some of the negative ones.
And this is a great interface of science as well. There are 3 universities that are working on a breed of mosquitoes that will carry the antidote to malaria. So the mosquito bite itself will inoculate those to what other mosquitoes will give them. I read an article about nanobots that are being injected into the bloodstream for people with cancer, and they would literally, the nanobots would seek out the cancer cells and inject them with a little bit of bad medicine for them and kill them. And these nanobots, I'm going, you got to be kidding me. As we look more and more into the interdisciplinariness of the sciences, how they're really starting to connect up in some amazing ways. I mean, the CRISPR gene came out of 3 or 4 different fields of science coming together and working together to create something new, which, of course, is creating these vaccines. We now can cure sickle cell anemia using the CRISPR understanding. The intricacy and the integralness and the intimacy that the biosphere brings home, it's very hard for me to walk in the woods or down a street in the city. And, I see them as related. The city hasn't quite caught up to the biosphere yet. The biosphere is self-sustaining and integral. It doesn't use itself up, if you will, but, uses those parts that it can keep remanufacturing on itself, as you said, Bob, or Marianne, creating these microbes that eat plastic. Over and over, we see that the city, the civilization, is really trying to analog nature. And the biosphere gives us great insight into how to do that. And I think we're going to get there. I mean, I look at some of the cities that are now planting forests on their roofs. There's a whole series of trying to, again, mimic nature in such a way that it can sustain us in our homes, if you will. Whether it's energy, whether it's communication, whatever it is. This is the journey of human beings. And the biosphere, to me, gives us great insight. And again, it gives us a great concept to hang so much cool stuff on.
Yeah, and there are so many people working on a lot of these solutions, and it's amazing some of the things that are out there. And I think what we were talking about last week too is there is this using human ingenuity, and it is planet wide. We can't, where it's for the whole, the biosphere. It's all of it connected. And I'm hopeful too. That we'll get there. We're just going to go through a lot of ugly stuff first.
Yeah. And that's we've talked about that next step of evolution in my mind, is justice. And, how much suffering has to happen at each piece, if you will. And that's part of the metric. That's part of the peace equation. How do we get there causing the least amount of suffering? Can we trade our way out of this, or do we have to go to war? How do we slice up the pie? How do we create a world where everybody has a place and sees that? I mean, I don't like mosquitoes, but there are birds that, eat 5,000-6,000 mosquitoes a night, and they need them to live. So even those pieces, there's parts of my own circle of being inside me that I don't like, and yet those are voices I do need to listen to, or if you don't, they end up screaming and create havoc in your life. And that's another analog to me, is your internal life is its own biosphere, if you will, its own network of interconnectedness and interdependence. And how do we own all that? And I think we're waking up to the biosphere both within and without. And I think that I wish us well.
I'm glad there are very smart people in the world that are working on some of this stuff.
Yeah. And regrettably, they aren't our leaders.
Right? That's true.
And
a lot of them get hung up by our leaders, which is a whole other issue.
Well, I mean, in parts of America, a doctor can't even, honor the Hippocratic Oath without going to jail. So we're seeing, and Bob, you said this in an earlier podcast, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. We always seem to be doing that. But the 2 steps forward is really important. And again, what Dan Wilson said, the little things make a big difference. And Marianne, you come back to this as well, and you're thinking that all of us, have to see that how integral we are to the thing. I've been doing some music at a Unity church with my wife and Julie Cruteau, who's the music director there. And I'm not really a Unity guy, but I'm not offended by it, and I think it's pretty cool stuff. And they talked to this week about the fundamentals of Unity, and one of them is that thoughts matter. That thoughts, we have to think in ways that are creative and peace-inducing and life-growing, and put those thoughts in action. And how important that is for every individual to see the power of their thought, the power of their own individual actions. And I think that's part of the internet and communication. That's one of the positive things that can come out of it, is we can begin to see how interactive we are. Well, we're seeing how interactive we are pretty loud and clear, I guess. But also to share the oneness of being. And, in holography, they say every little piece in holography of film contains the whole, but from a different perspective. So you put them all together and you get a three-dimensional view. And I think that's what human beings are working for. We're trying to find a way to put all the pieces together that we might have a whole three-dimensional picture of what it is. And I am convinced that Edward Seuss, who coined the phrase biosphere, that concept has been very helpful to the human family.
Yep. Well, and I think, one of the things too is, if you think of us as pieces of a holographic image, and I think one of the ways we have to move forward is to respect those different viewpoints and not reject them out of hand. And because it's hard to maybe see things that you could never see before. And it takes a shift. I remember when I used to do mathematics, and I would be working a problem, and I would look at these formulas, and they would be like Greek to me. And then all of a sudden, after working them and playing with them, I would feel a physical shift, and it would be, oh, yes, that makes sense, that makes sense, that makes sense. And it would all click. And I think that's something that when we listen to other people with respect and we open our minds up, and we may have to be exposed to it more than once, over and over again, until we can kind of click and go, okay, I see that. You don't have to always agree with it, but if you can at least see a different point of view. And I think that's something that's missing in our collective dialogue right now.
Yeah.
So,
Bob,
making sure we're all together.
All right.
Yeah.
Bob, final comments?
Well, again, I think that we can learn a lot from the biological, ecological sciences, from systems theory, as we've talked about it in many different episodes, and realize that it all applies to us, that those little changes, those little variables that may not seem to be that important can have huge effects for good or ill. So we need to make sure that the changes we make are going to lead to positive outcomes as much as we have control of those.
Amen. Mary Ann, final comments?
I thought that was my final comment, but I would just say
No, go for it.
If we could just make changes that have positive outcomes, wouldn't that be beautiful? So I'll end with that.
Yeah. Well, I think life's an algorithm, so we got to get stuff wrong to know not that way. So where do we go next? I mean, seriously, we've gone a lot, and I want to bring it back to maybe something a little more personal. So next podcast, we're going to talk about our own personal stories. I'm going to ask my cohorts to think about their life. What are some personal stories that made a difference in your life, that gave you a certain trajectory? Maybe it was a story that had a negative impact. Maybe it was a story that had a positive impact. But our personal stories are important. They inform our life. And I'll be honest, I look at my life and those places that really sucked, they became pivot moments that changed the direction of my life. And that changed direction was, again, for the good, for the positive. course, it landed me in jail and, a bunch of other places, but we'll talk about some of that next week. So until then, my friends, blessings, and know that you are a thread in this unbelievable fabric called the biosphere, and it is life itself, and it is you. Until then, much peace, much peace.